I just received orders to Iceland. Hi, welcome to amosseed&feed Bible Study and our current series titled Christian Alphabet. Today's lesson is the letter C for contentment. If you've learned a little something today once you've reviewed this video and enjoyed it, please like us and share with a friend. And if you would, add a comment. We would love to hear from you and what you think. Also, if you'd like to be notified when the next lessons are released, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button. You'll be glad you did. Needless to say, orders to Iceland were a long time ago, but they made a lasting impression on my life. At the time when I received the orders, I was living in Goldsboro, North Carolina, and going to a local church, learning more about God, and I met a young lady who would eventually become my wife. But to get orders to Iceland? Really? Being in the military, you can ask questions as to why, but in the end, when the orders are cut, we just might as well go start packing because we're going. That's all there is to it. I knew it would be hard being away from family and friends, but also the girl that I'd fallen in love with who would be my wife. But because I was going to Iceland, I needed to be content. And so what I did was I packed 3 Bibles. 2 of them were different types of study Bibles as well as an ordinary plain Jane Bible. But I also had a Strong's Exhaustive Concordance that I carried with me, and a Matthew Henry's commentary of the whole Bible, and some recommended books from the pastor that I would read while I was there. Outside of the study materials, I really don't remember much about what I packed because I set out to be content with the orders and the situation I was going to find myself in and take advantage of it to its fullest. Outside of work, I had plenty of time to do other things, but built into every situation, there is always a purpose. Many times we don't see the purpose at first. Sometimes we don't see it till after, but there always is one. Iceland was no different. While I was there, I had an opportunity to read through the Bible from cover to cover for the first time. What an achievement. It was wonderful to have done that, and I learned so much doing so, looking for those little nuggets that the Lord needed me to know. Then I had some other general Bible study that I was doing based on those books that the pastor gave me to read and study. For a year, I also communicated with Susan, my future bride, via snail mail. We didn't have laptop computers. We didn't have cell phones. We didn't have regular landlines that were really affordable. And it just wasn't practical. So snail mail was it. But it was a blessing because we learned more about each other, writing letters back and forth, spilling our emotions and our love toward each other, and discussing different things that we would encounter as a married couple in the future through those letters. And I learned more about Susan, and Susan learned more about me during that time than if we were together. And then there was my roommate. My roommate was a Catholic, but he did not know Jesus as a Savior. And by the time he left Iceland, he did. My boss had led him to Christ. And when I learned that, I was actually kind of disappointed because I thought, why didn't I get an opportunity to lead him to Christ? I was there. I thought I was doing the right thing. But then my roommate came to me and says, I want to tell you something. If it had not been for you, I'd have not accepted Jesus Christ as Savior. I watched you every day, and I could see there was something in you that I needed. And that's why. So you see, there is a reason why I was in Iceland. A man came to know Christ. Being content because God had a job for me to do, and he will take care of me and take care of the rest. We just need to be willing and open and obedient to his command and be content with that. Hebrews 13, verses 5 and 6. Let your conversation be without covetousness, and be content with such things as ye have. For he hath said, I will never leave thee nor forsake thee, so that we may boldly say, the Lord is my helper, and I will not fear what man shall do unto me. As we see our word content in that verse, Strong's Exhaustive Concordance tells us to be content is having all of one's needs satisfied and sufficient. No Webster's Dictionary of the American Language says contentment is a resting or satisfaction of mind without disquiet, otherwise known as acquiescence. Let's take a little deeper look here. Disquiet means to disturb, deprive of peace, rest or tranquility, to make uneasy or restless, to harass the body, to fret, to vex the mind. That's some pretty powerful stuff there too, being disquieted. Just plain worry. Acquiescence, a quiet assent, a silent submission. Just like I was in Iceland. I got the orders. Yes, I asked questions. But in the end, I was content. I packed my bags and I went. And I was submissive to the orders. Let's go to 1 Timothy chapter 6, verses 6 through 8. But godliness with contentment is great gain. For we brought nothing into this world, and it is certain we can carry nothing out. And having food and raiment, let us be therewith content. So what do we see? The Apostle Paul is writing to Timothy. He's actually writing to him from prison. And so Paul doesn't have a whole lot of anything except raiment and food. He's content. And then what do we see here? In verse 6. Very powerful. But godliness with contentment is great gain. Why? Verse 7. We don't see anybody at a funeral dragging a U-Haul trailer to the cemetery in order to bury it with the man that's died or the woman that's died. You didn't bring anything in, you're not taking anything out. Plain and simple. And so be content with what we got. We can't take it with us anyway. Discontentment. Let's take a look at an example of being discontented. If we go back to Exodus chapter 16, verse 15, we find, and when the children of Israel saw it, they said one to another, it is manna. From they wet not what it was. And Moses said unto them, this is the bread which the Lord hath given to you to eat. What we find here is Israel had just left Egypt. They're now in the wilderness. And of course, they weren't able to carry much food at all. They were rushed out. They went through the Red Sea. And now they're in the wilderness. And there's no real food. They don't have any crop. And there's over 1 million people with Moses. That's a lot of people. That's a lot of food. God knew this. And so what did he do? He supplied food in the form of manna. They could make it into whatever they wanted to. They would gather it in the morning, and it was there for the day. They'd go out the next morning and do the same thing. It's just like going out to your garden. You just go out the tent, and there it is laying on the ground. You just pick it up and eat it. It was God's gift to them. It was their supply. Be content. But what happened? Numbers chapter 11, verses 5 through 6 tells us, we remember the fish which we did eat in Egypt freely, and cucumbers, the melons, the leeks, and the onions, and the garlic. But now our soul is dried up. There is nothing at all besides this manna before our eyes. Wow, really? God gave them everything they needed. They already had raiment, and he gave them food in the form of manna, but yet they're complaining that it's not what they want. It's not what they desire. They're not happy with God. They're discontent with God. In the same chapter, a little bit further down, verse 10, then Moses heard the people weep throughout their families, every man in the door of his tent, and the anger of the Lord was kindled greatly, and Moses was also displeased. Wow. Another powerful verse. These people were so discontent, they were crying about it. They were upset they weren't getting their way. They wanted what they wanted to eat. They didn't want what God gave them. That's craziness. Can you believe it? God supplies everything they need. Food and raiment, and they're all upset about it. It's not what they wanted. Same chapter, Numbers chapter 11, verses 18 to 20. And say thou unto the people, sanctify yourselves against tomorrow, and ye shall eat flesh. For ye have wept in the ears of the Lord, saying, who shall give us flesh to eat? For it was well with us in Egypt. Therefore the Lord will give you flesh, and ye shall eat. Ye shall not eat 1 day, nor 2 days, nor 5 days, neither 10 days, nor 20 days, but even a whole month, until it come out at thy nostrils, and it be loathsome unto you, because that ye have despised the Lord which is among you, and have wept before him, saying, why came we forth out of Egypt? Now, Verse 18, it looks like the people got their way. God's going to go ahead and grant them what they've been crying about. They want flesh. And so God's just not going to give it 1 day or 2 days or a week. He's going to give it to them a whole month. He's going to give them so much they're going to hate it. And that's exactly what he did. And then he tells them why he's doing it. Because ye have despised the Lord which is among you. That's a scary thought. Despising God. That's pretty heavy. And you're more worried about what you used to have as to what you personally want instead of what God's given you. Same chapter. Chapter 11, verses 32 through 33. And the people stood up all that day and all that night and all the next day, and they gathered the quail. He that gathered least gathered 10 homers, and they spread them all abroad for themselves round about the camp. And while the flesh was yet between their teeth, ere it was chewed, while they were chewing it, the wrath of the Lord was kindled against the people, and the Lord smote the people with a very great plague. Yes, they got what they wanted. They didn't like what God had for them. And because they despised God, they disliked God, in essence, you could actually say they hated God because God didn't give them what they wanted. They weren't willing to do what God wanted them to do. And so they were disobedient. They were not content. Let's take a look at an example of being content. 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verses 24 through 28. Of the Jews 5 times received I 40 stripes, save one. Thrice I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. Thrice I suffered shipwreck. A night and a day I have been in the deep. In journeyings often, in perils of water, and perils of robbers, and perils by my own countrymen, in perils by the heathen, in perils in the city, in perils in the wilderness, in perils in the sea, in perils among false brethren, in weariness and painfulness, in watchings often, and hunger and thirst, and fastings often, and cold and nakedness. Besides those things that are without, that which cometh upon me daily, the care of all the churches. This is the resume of the Apostle Paul. He had suffered many, many things. If anybody should be discontent with the leading of God, it would be Paul. Look at all the stuff that happened to him. Why would he be satisfied? But yet, what do we learn from Paul? Philippians chapter 4, verses 11 through 13. Not that I speak in respect of want, for I have learned in whatever state I am therewith to be content. I know both how to be abased, I know how to abound. Everywhere and in all things I am instructed both to be full and to be hungry, both to abound and to suffer need. I can do all things through Christ which strengtheneth me. That's some powerful statements. Paul learned to be content, no matter what the circumstances, because he knew that God was going to give him all his needs. Raiment and food. That's what the body needs. And he was happy. God took care of the rest. He didn't have to worry about it. He was commanded to go all the way to Rome, and God told him he would make it all the way to Rome. And he did. But he encountered all these other things throughout his missionary journeys, as well as going all the way to Rome. But yet he had great success in the Lord, being content and doing what he's asked to do. Luke chapter 12, verses 27 through 28. Consider the lilies, how they grow. They toil not, they spin not, and yet I say unto you that Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed like one of these. If then God so clothed the grass, which is today in the field, and tomorrow is cast into the oven, how much more will he clothe you, O ye of little faith? What is Jesus telling us? The lilies of the field are more beautiful and more glorious than Solomon in all his glory. And Solomon was the richest, wisest man in the world has ever known. And yet, the grass, the lilies, today it's beautiful in the field. Tomorrow, someone's going to cut it down and put it in the oven for fuel. But yet, Jesus goes on to say that you are more important than even the lilies of the field. How much more will he clothe you than he does the lilies of the field? Have faith. God will take care of you. Proverbs chapter 19, verse 23. The fear of the Lord tendeth to life, and he that hath it shall abide satisfied. He shall not be visited with evil. So the fear. Strong's Exhaustive Concordance says, fear, reverence, and piety. We should have fear in the Lord. He tends to our life. He takes care of us. Have reverence to that. Live in piety. Let's go back to 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 6. But godliness with contentment is great gain. That is important for us to remember. Our gain is to be content. In other words, relying on God, trusting him that he's going to take care of you, and being satisfied with what he gives us. And being satisfied is not doing like the Israelites did in the wilderness, where they were upset and disgraced God and actually hated God because of what he was doing. They were not happy with God. We are to be content. Where is your heart? Are you disquieted? Are you disrespecting God? Are you not happy with God, what God has given to you? Be content. Think on these things.